Hello, it is so good to see you guys again. We are going to start our Sunday school by lighting our candle and letting us know that Sunday school has started and God is with us. And the story that we're going to talk about today really has God with us, because we're going to hear about God leading the Israelis out of Egypt. But before we think about that, I want you to think about who's in charge of you. Probably your parents, maybe your grandparents. Sometimes it might be a babysitter, but you're also probably in charge of some things too. You might be in charge of a pet. Are you in charge of making sure your pet has water and food, maybe a walk? We all have places that we're in charge of. But the nicest thing to know is the person that's really in charge is God. God will take care of us. And the story we're going to hear today is how God does take care of us. He gives us promises, and then he's there and he takes care of us. So let's go ahead and open in prayer. Dear God, there are times when we feel scared and things don't go right. Our friends seem like enemies. We're tired, we're hungry, there's nowhere to run. You send us people to follow, people who care, people who share. Lord, hear our prayer. We know that you are there. Amen. Well, our story today actually started a long time before our story. It started with the Israelis in Egypt. And because there became so many Israelis in Egypt, the Egyptians, the pharaohs, the leaders kind of got scared, and so they ended up making the Israelis slaves so that they could be in charge of them and make them do what they wanted. Well, about that time, God didn't like that, and so he talked to Moses, and he told Moses that he was to be the leader, and he was to take the Israeli people out of Egypt and get them to the promised land. So he needed to do that. So he went to the Pharaoh and he asked them, "Let my people go." And the Pharaoh said, "No." So God sent 7 different things to the Egyptian people. 7 plagues, 7 things that weren't nice for the Egyptian people. And after each one, Moses would go back and say, "Let my people go." And the Pharaoh would say, "No." And then God would do something else. Finally, after 7 times, when Moses went and said, "Let my people go," the Pharaoh finally said, "Go, get out of here. I'm tired of you people. Go." So they did. And he led his people out of Egypt. So we are going to start reading that. And it's kind of interesting because it's in part of the Bible. The name of the Bible chapter is called Exodus. And Exodus means to leave, to go away. So this is how they started leaving Egypt. And you know, sometimes it's hard to leave a place. Even if it's not a very good place, at least you know what it is. So to get up and leave and go somewhere where you don't know what's going to happen can be kind of scary. And sometimes when this was going on, the people started to complain. Even though God was leading them out, they still complained. So as we read this, you're going to hear about them complaining. So we're starting in Exodus 14. It's a long chapter, so we'll go through it. When the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Philhariah, between Miglo and the sea, in front of Bazalone. You shall camp opposite by the sea. The Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, 'They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them.' And then this is God talking now. He says, 'I will harden Pharaoh's heart.'" He's going to harden his heart. "And he will pursue them. so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all of his army. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. So they did what he said. So God's talking to Moses, and he's telling them where they're supposed to go. He's also telling them he's going to harden the Pharaoh's heart because he wants them to know that he is God. Well, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed towards the people. That heart got hardened. And they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our servants?" So he had his chariots made ready, and he took his army with him. He took 600 picked chariots and other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord had hardened the heart of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelis who were going out boldly. The Egyptians pursued them with all of the Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his chariot drivers and his army, and they overtook them camped by the sea. Because remember, the Israelis were walking. The Pharaoh had his chariots and his drivers and his soldiers and his army, and they were coming. They were coming after the Israelis. As Pharaoh grew near, the Israelis looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelis cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, here's their complaining, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? This is not the very thing we told you in Egypt. Leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." So they weren't really trusting God, were they? Because God had told them this is what they were supposed to do. But when it got tough, and when they looked back and they saw the Egyptian army coming, they went, "Whoa! Why are you doing this to us? Leave us alone." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to keep still." So the Lord will fight for you. You only have to keep still. Then the Lord said to Moses, I think this is really interesting. The Lord says to Moses, "Why do you cry out for me? Tell the Israelis to go forward." So, sometimes we have to do something. And God's saying, stop complaining. Stop crying out. Do it. Do it. Move forward. "But you lift your staff and stretch out your hands over the sea and divide it, that the Israelis may go into the sea on dry ground. Then I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all of his army, his chariots and his chariot drivers. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained glory for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots and his chariot drivers." So he's telling Moses, go forward. I've got it. I've got it. We're going to make this happen. The angel of God, who was going before the Israeli army, moved and went behind them, and a pillar of clouds moved in front of them and took place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of the Israelis, and so the cloud was there in the darkness, and it lit up the night, so one did not come near the other all night. So during the night, before they started to do this, they really couldn't see each other, because there was this cloud that God had brought down. Then when Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong wind all night, and he turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the Israelis went into the sea on dry ground. The sea parted. The winds parted it, and the Israelis went on dry ground. They went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on the right and on the left. So they just walked right through, kind of like a big old arch of water there. The Egyptians pursued them, and they went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord, in a pillar of fire and cloud, looked down on the Egyptian army, and he threw the Egyptians' army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelis, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." So God's making it tough on the on the Egyptians. The Israelis walk right through. He's making their wheels turn, probably in mud. He's not making it easy. And then, to make it even worse, the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water will come back on the Egyptians, upon their chariots and their chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand, and at dawn, the sea returned to its normal level. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariot and the chariot drivers, and the entire army of the pharaohs had followed them into the sea, and not one of them remained. But the Israelis walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on the left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians, and the Israelis saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel learned the work of the Lord against the Egyptians. The people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So, God wanted Moses to lead them out of Egypt. And they went, but then it got tough, and they got upset. And God said, keep them moving, keep going. And he parted those waters. They walked through, and the waters came back. And the Egyptians couldn't get through. So God had taken care of them. God had made it happen. The promise of getting them out of Egypt, he fulfilled it. And then, a couple things that I thought were really interesting. First of all, God said to Moses, stop complaining, stop crying out to me, get moving, go. And sometimes I think God just wants us to listen to him, believe him, and go. And when it seemed like there was no way to escape, God opened up a way. He put a dry path through the sea. Sometimes when we have a problem and we think, there's no way. There's no way that this is going to work out. It can't work out. Don't panic, because God has a way. And we just have to believe in that and follow his way. We have to think that there's a way, because God has a way. Now, it didn't tell us, but this water that they walked through was the Red Sea. It's called the Red Sea. And I had some interesting facts about the Red Sea. It is mentioned 30 times in the Bible. I don't know where else, but that it is mentioned. The world's first lighthouse was built on the Red Sea in the 3rd century. Today, lots of people like to go to the Red Sea. It's kind of a tourist place. Much of the Red Sea is very shallow, so it's not very deep anyway. And the Red Sea gets its name because it has red-colored aquatic plants. So the plants in the water, probably not all of them, but some of them have a reddish color. And that's why it's called the Red Sea. And lots of people go to visit the Red Sea. So a story where we realize, again, we just have to believe in God. So let's go ahead and close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for keeping your promises. Help us to remember when it doesn't look like there's any way out of the problem we're in, that you do have a way. And we just need to listen to it, trust you, and then move forward. Thank you, Lord. We love you.